we're at the point where the borders are almost done. Remember, we have the yellow and the blue border. So all 4 of the yellow borders are on, and now I'm going to sew on the last of the blue borders. One of the things I wanted to show was the layout on the table. The quilt starts to get so big that it's a little hard to handle. So I want to make sure it's lined up well here, but controllable here. So I added my ironing board to the area of my sewing machine to keep it up and able to move better. And then I put a chip clip on here so that it kind of keeps it in one piece down at the other end. So I have my quilting foot on the sewing machine, and that's going to help me align my piece, and so I'm ready to sew. And I personally go very slow. I could go faster, but I'd rather spend the time here to get a quality piece. So now all I have to do is sew to the end, and the last blue border will be done. What I've chosen to do is use a backing of fleece. In doing that, I've also decided not to do batting. Now, batting is an extra layer that is often used, and it goes between your bottom layer and the quilting layer. Now, when you're machine stitching like I am, be sure to experiment to make sure that your machine can accommodate all of the layers that you decide to work with. Okay, so now we have it all laid out. For this phase, what I need is a little masking tape, lots of safety pins. We're going to use safety pins, and then I found this cool cutting board glass that I'm using to kind of squeegee out to make the quilt flat. You're going to put everything out, and the first thing you're going to do is make sure that your top portion matches your bottom portion. You want an overlap on your bottom portion. Later we'll trim this all up and put an edging on it to make it all neat. And then you're going to smooth it out. I don't think you can iron the piece too much, so I also took the opportunity to iron it again. And then I started marking out where I want to do my stitching and pinning. You want to do everything from the center out, because you want it to start going out, and if it needs room to flatten out, you want there to be room on the ends to do that. So I flattened it out, and then what I did is the seam that I'm going to sew is the one that I'm going to start pinning, and I'm going to start pinning with safety pins on either side, approximately 3 to 4 inches apart. Now, you want to make it the width of your walking foot. And so you might want to take your foot and just glide it around along the seam to make sure that you have clearance, because it's very frustrating if your walking foot gets hung up in your pins as you're stitching. So now I'm ready to stitch. What I will do is stitch across the middle first. So I've labeled the seams with my masking tape, and that will be seam number 1. Then I'll do another outer seam, the other outer seam going that way, and then I'll start doing the long seams. Now, what I'm sewing in my particular case are the seams. I have 12 squares, so my first major seams are going to be 2 here, and then 2 on the lengthwise, and that's how we're going to go. Now, to take it to the machine, I've already done some of the stitching. In fact, I'm to the point where now I'm going to be stitching just this seam. You're going to want to prepare it. So to do that, because I'm stitching lengthwise and I'll want this smaller portion to go under the bridge of the machine, I'm going to roll it up on each end to get it ready to stitch this seam. Now, at the end of the seam, I put a safety pin so as my machine reaches the end, I know it's there. All right, we're going to roll this sucker up, and then we're going to go to the machine and we're going to stitch this long seam. And not only pin it on every one of the crucial seams that I'm going to sew, but then after those were secure, I pinned a lot. In other words, you want to make it as secure as you can before you move to the machine. Now we're positioned at the machine, and what I found was easier is I just removed the walking foot before I positioned the piece and then put it back on. I found that easier. You may or may not. Now it's important, you're going to be doing what's called stitching in the ditch, which means that you're going to position your needle right in the middle of the seam and try as much as you can to stay in the middle of the seam so that the stitch that you're doing stays hidden. So you're just going to move forward, and you're going to, I personally have to stop quite often to reposition my piece, and every once in a while I get up and go even to the other side of the table, and I pull the cloth through so that it's not bunched up on the other side. This is when it's kind of handy to, if you have a friend to help you, a sewing buddy, or even a sew friend, sorry, I couldn't avoid that one, to help you keep the fabric straight. It's kind of a two-man job, but if you're by yourself you can do it. It's just that I have to stop frequently and reposition the cloth. So I am going to go ahead and start at the slowest speed, and with my magnifying glass I'm stitching as closely as I can to the inside of the seam, and that's how you're going to do it. We went over cutting fabric early on, a real simplistic cut, but when it comes to my binding, I'm going to do multiple layers of cutting. Now I would never cut personally any more thickness than 4 layers of fabric. So to do that, my binding calls for a strip, multiple strips actually, that are 2.5 inches wide. And so I have folded the fabric so that there are 4 layers of the fabric together. And so now what I'm going to do is I lined up the edge of my fabric with the bright yellow line on my cutting board, and now I'm going to line up the 2.5 inches using my plastic piece. Now I'm going to line it up so that my tape is down here so I can see what I'm doing, and to do multiple layers I'm going to use quite a bit of force. If you don't, then you're going to have to go over it multiple times. So I'm going to start back here, and I kind of listen. I can kind of hear that it's cutting all of the thicknesses. I don't know if you can hear that, but I do, and it sounds really good. There we go. Now let's confirm before I move the plastic piece that I have a clean cut. Look at that. That's really good. So I do that in this case at least 7 times, and what I end up with are the strips that I need. Now let's talk about cutting the 45-degree angle that we need for the joining of the edges. First of all, I'm not real happy with this edge because it's loose. So I want those edges, and I'm doing 2 at a time here. These aren't the ones that are going to be joined. This is a fold here that I have, but I'm going to do 2 at a time. So on your board, here's your 45-degree angle, and that's what our objective is going to be, is getting a nice clean 45-degree angle. So first thing I'm going to do is lay this piece of fabric out, and I'm going to just cut a clean edge. Now I want it lined up nicely on the bottom heavy yellow line, and then I'm going to take it here and with my plastic piece. Remember, I'm left-handed, so if you're right-handed, all of this will be opposite. I got rid of that little piece here, and now I'm just going to leave it there and line it up for my 45-degree angle. And to do that, I have my heavy line that I line up to, and then it's going to be really important that I get a crisp corner here. And so there's our 45-degree angle.